What is TypeScript? What are the benefits of it? And should you learn it and should you use it within your programs? Well, TypeScript, it's JavaScript, but it's JavaScript with added syntax for types. JavaScript does have a type system, and values in JavaScript, they do have data types, things like strings, booleans, numbers, things like that. But in JavaScript, the type system just dynamically knows those types, and it will dynamically assign those types to values. You don't need to explicitly say this value has this type in JavaScript. So for example, on line 15 right here, I have a constant called number, and I assign it to the value of 12, which is a number. And if I use the type of operator and I check, okay, what's the type of this number here? Well, in JavaScript, I'm still going to get number here. All right, so JavaScript, it definitely does have types within its program. But in TypeScript, you can explicitly give a value a type. So here on line 24, this is TypeScript code, and this is what this would look like. So here, I have a constant called my number, and I use colon, and then I say number after that colon. So what I'm doing here, and you don't need to know the syntax right now. I will have future videos on how TypeScript works in a little bit more depth, but I'm basically saying with this colon here that this variable here, this constant, it is going to be assigned the type of number. So this constant is going to hold a value that has the data type of number, and I assign it to the value of 12. But if I try to assign it to a string here, you see that I get an error. It's saying, hey, type string is not assignable to type number. So TypeScript will catch these errors because I need to explicitly say what data type a value is going to have here. So I can use the value of 12. And then here on line 25, I have a constant called greeting, and I'm assigning the data type of string with my colon here to whatever value that this greeting constant holds. And I put hello in there. But you can see if I try to change this to a number, I'm going to get an error because I'm trying to assign a number to the data type of string. So in TypeScript, you can explicitly say what data type a value is going to be. And if I use the type of operator here, you're still going to get what you would expect here. So if I run this here, you're going to see I get number and string. All right, so those data types all align. Now, one thing to note is that in TypeScript, you don't always need to explicitly give a type to a value. TypeScript has something called type inference, to where I can remove this altogether, and TypeScript already knows it is going to have the data type of a number because I'm assigning a number to it. So TypeScript will already enforce the type number to this constant. Now, since this is a constant, it can only be this one single number here. But if I change this to a let, then TypeScript would let me change this my number variable to any number I want, but it would still have to be data type of number. So TypeScript does have type inference in which you don't need to always explicitly give something types, but I'll cover that in future videos a little bit more. Now, this is also going to work for functions here. So on line 30, I define a function called add. It takes two parameters here, num1 and num2, as you can see right here. And what I do is I use the colon or the data type assignment operator here, and I assign the data type of number to num1, and I do the same thing for num2. And here, after my parentheses here, I use colon number. And that's going to say I'm going to return a number from this function. And then what I do is I return num1 plus num2. So if I run this code here and I call my add function, I console log the result, you're going to see I get exactly what you would expect. I get 3. But what happens if I try to pass a string to this function? Well, TypeScript is going to yell at me right away. It's going to say, hey, argument of type string is not assignable to the parameter of type number. So if I try to add a string and a number, I'm not going to get the result I want, and I'm probably going to get a bug in my program. So TypeScript helps prevent this by just saying, hey, what you're trying to do here doesn't make sense. This doesn't align with the function definition that you gave here. So in TypeScript, you can explicitly give values different data types. To where JavaScript, it just kind of implicitly knows the data types. Now, TypeScript does have type inference in which you don't need to always explicitly give something of data type, but TypeScript will still enforce those types to those different values, even if it is an implicit data type. One thing that's important to remember is that it will compile down to JavaScript. So TypeScript, it will get turned into JavaScript. So all of these type definitions here, those are going to be removed. And when this gets compiled and run, it's just going to be JavaScript code, which means that TypeScript can run anywhere that JavaScript can run, which means that you can use TypeScript anywhere you use JavaScript. Now, what are the benefits of TypeScript? Well, I think one big benefit of TypeScript is that it gives you a better understanding of your code. If you have to explicitly give different values in your code certain types, then you really have to know what's going on in your code, and you have to know the potential values that are being assigned to different variables and the potential data types of those values. And you have to think through your code a little bit more, which I think is beneficial, and TypeScript forces you to do that. Also, your code editor is likely going to have a little bit better autocomplete if you are constantly defining your types, because it's always going to know like the interface or the structure of a certain value, and it's going to be able to provide better autocomplete because of that, which I definitely think is a benefit as well. Now, I would say potentially the biggest benefit of TypeScript is that it allows you to catch certain bugs or certain errors at compile time instead of at runtime. So for example, when I tried to do this with this function here, in which in my function definition, I assign my parameters to numbers, but when I called my function, I tried to call it with a string here. I don't need to run this function to know that I have an error here. TypeScript already knows, hey, what are you doing? You're trying to pass a string to a number parameter here. And it tells me right in my code editor, this is VS Code here. So at compile time, this is already giving me an error and I can fix it right away. But in JavaScript, I wouldn't have this error here. I would have to run this program and I would have to run this function to eventually see that I'm adding a number to a string. So I'm getting this like weird coercion to take place and I'm just getting an incorrect value. And that's going to take more time rather than seeing this right away. So TypeScript can allow you to catch these errors right away when you are writing your code compared to when you are running your code, which can speed up development and I think is one of the biggest benefits of TypeScript. And then also it can also be self-documenting to where, if some other programmer wrote this function, I know exactly how I need to call this function. I need to call this function with 2 numbers. I should not call this function with any other data types. It can be self-documenting and allow for better understanding across a development team. And in my experience, TypeScript, it can take longer to write up front. So when you're first learning TypeScript, it's probably going to take longer to write compared to JavaScript, which some see as a detriment. But I think that over the long run, TypeScript ends up speeding up development because you're catching these errors at compile time. You probably have to write a little bit less tests with TypeScript. You have a little bit better autocomplete. If your code is more maintainable because it's self-documenting, that's going to lead to faster development over time, especially when you need to refactor things and different things like that. So I think up front, TypeScript does have that cost of it just takes more to define these types and go through all that structure. But I think over time, TypeScript can actually speed up development. And I would also say that a lot of jobs these days and professional jobs are going the TypeScript route when they're starting a new project or they're converting their code base to TypeScript. And I think when it comes to getting a job, it definitely is a nice little bonus if you can put on there that, hey, I know TypeScript. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't detriments to TypeScript and that TypeScript is all good. Like, it does take longer to write. It can be a headache to try to convert a code base to TypeScript, even if you do it incrementally. Also, there's more configuration of your project when it comes to using TypeScript and the compiler you're using, and there's more complexity to that. Also, TypeScript isn't necessarily just some super easy language to know. Like, yes, it is just kind of a superset of JavaScript, but TypeScript can get complex when you get into some different things that you can do with generics and type aliasing and different things like that. And not every developer on your team might be well versed in TypeScript, and it might significantly slow down your development time up front. And if you're working for a startup and you need to be nimble and move quickly, maybe TypeScript isn't the best option for you. So it's not all just like sunshine and rainbows. But for my personal opinion on TypeScript, I am a fan of TypeScript. And whenever I start a personal project from scratch, I use it. But like I said here, that doesn't mean it's always the best. And there are situations in which you might not decide to use it. The professional code base that I work on is a startup. It's all JavaScript. we don't think it's the best idea for us right now to convert our entire code base to TypeScript when we haven't even reached like product market fit with our product yet. And we're still kind of in the early stages of that. We think it's best to just work on making our application something people would want to use. And then over time, as our company grows and as our team grows, we can make that conversion if we think it makes the most sense. But the big question for you is, should you learn it? And I think so, but maybe not necessarily right up front. And just know that it's not necessarily super easy, like I mentioned earlier. Like there are TypeScript specific things that you're going to have to learn, and it will take time. And my recommendation is I would still learn kind of the fundamentals first of CSS, HTML, JavaScript, and this is assuming you want to be a web or application developer. I would learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript first, and then I would probably pick one framework. I'm a fan of React. And then after you have like the fundamentals of those, then I would start kind of learning TypeScript and learn the fundamentals of TypeScript. And then for your job, if it's written in TypeScript, well, then at that point, you can learn a little bit more on the go and some more advanced use cases of TypeScript. But I would still learn kind of these big four first: HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then one front-end framework. That's going to get you a job. And then I think that you can learn TypeScript kind of on the go a little bit more. But if you have a good understanding of those and you want to kind of up your game a bit, I think the next best thing to learn might be just like the fundamentals of TypeScript. All right. So hopefully this video gives you a good idea of kind of what TypeScript is, how it works, the benefits of it, and whether you should learn it or not. So thanks for tuning into this, and I'll see you in that next one.